You have come here tonight seeking clarity, yet what you seek is not merely intellectual understanding. It is an encounter with the unseen forces that stir behind the veil of your consciousness. When I speak of the narcissist, of the manipulator, of the criminal who harms with no remorse, I am not speaking of a distant figure locked away in some sterile cell. No, I am speaking of a mirror that reveals not only their shadow, but also yours. For every act of cruelty committed in the world has its echo in the collective depths of humanity's soul. And unless we dare to look, we risk becoming complicit through blindness. The narcissist, you see, does not spring forth from nowhere. He is not born fully armed with malice, like some mythical god of destruction. He is the product of shadow, the dark reservoir of all that is unacknowledged within the psyche. In every man and woman, the shadow accumulates. It is the collection of rejected impulses, forbidden desires, humiliations, traumas, and the primitive hunger for power that civilization demands we repress. Yet repression does not annihilate. What is cast into the abyss continues to live, and in certain individuals it takes possession. The narcissist is one such individual, but in his case, the shadow takes a peculiar shape. His outward persona, his mask is glittering, seductive, intoxicating. He presents himself as superior, beautiful, worthy of admiration, but beneath this mask lurks a shadow swollen with shame, emptiness, and rage. He cannot bear to confront his own insignificance, so he projects it onto others, reducing them to pawns. To manipulate is to affirm his existence. To harm is to silence the gnawing inner voice that whispers, "You are nothing." Now let me give you the example that chills the blood yet illuminates this truth. There was once a man, outwardly ordinary, who became notorious for his sudden eruption of violence. Neighbors described him as polite, even shy. A man who worked quietly in a small shop, yet behind his facade he carried a secret dream, a recurring dream that had stalked him since adolescence. In this dream, a dark figure stood at the edge of his bed. It was neither fully human nor fully shadow, but a silhouette that watched him without eyes. Every night the dream repeated, and with each visitation he awoke more restless, more agitated, more estranged from the waking world. He came to believe that the figure was commanding him, that only through spilling blood could he quiet its silent gaze. One evening, the man lured a stranger into an alley and enacted the ritual he thought demanded of him. It was swift, brutal, and seemingly senseless. Yet, in his confession, he did not speak of hatred for his victim. Instead, he said, "I only wanted the shadow to leave me alone." Do you see? Here we encounter the terrifying autonomy of the unconscious. The shadow, denied and repressed, rose through the medium of dream and drove him to crime. His act was not the cold calculation of rational evil, but the desperate obedience of a man possessed, and though few among us will act with such violence, the mechanism is not alien. Each of you carries a shadow that, if ignored, will whisper in subtler ways, in the impulse to humiliate, to dominate, to belittle, to deceive. The line between you and the criminal is thinner than you imagine. The narcissist, however, turns this possession into a strategy of survival. He cannot look at his shadow directly, for if he did, the abyss of shame would annihilate him. So he projects it outward. He convinces himself that others are weak, foolish, inferior. He manipulates to prove his superiority. He harms to silence the echo of his own woundedness. Yet, paradoxically, every victory deepens his dependency. Like a man who drinks seawater to quench thirst, each conquest leaves him emptier, more enslaved to the shadow he refuses to face. I tell you now, the danger of the narcissist is not only that he wounds others, it is that he embodies a pattern that lives in all of us. In him, the shadow has become sovereign. In us, the shadow waits for neglect. The dream of the dark figure may not come to you, but perhaps it will come as an inexplicable urge to destroy a relationship you value, to sabotage success just as it arrives, to betray someone who trusts you. These two are whispers of the shadow, clothed not in blood, but in self-inflicted wounds. So I ask you, do you dare to look? Do you dare to acknowledge the figure at the edge of your bed? To see the parts of yourself that hunger for control, that rage in silence, that ache with unspoken envy? If you deny them, you risk becoming their servant. If you face them, you may yet transform, for the shadow, when integrated, becomes not a demon, but a source of power, raw energy reclaimed for life. This is why we must study the psychology of crime, not as an aberration, but as a revelation. The murderer who obeyed his shadow is but an extreme example of the same mechanism that moves in smaller, subtler crimes. The betrayal of love, the manipulation of trust, the exploitation of weakness. Every crime begins in the unconscious. Every harm begins in a refusal to look within, and so, as we continue, I will take you deeper into these realms. We will wander through the labyrinths of dreams, where the criminal finds his destiny scripted in symbols. We will meet the archetypes, the false hero, the dark warrior, the devouring mother that sees men and women and drive them into acts they do not understand. We will unmask the persona, the smiling mask of the fraudster who paints grotesque figures in secret. We will confront the collective unconscious itself, where crowds turn to mobs, where the civilized face of humanity dissolves into a predatory pack. But before we travel further, remember this. When you examine the narcissist's shadow, you are not studying a stranger. You are gazing into a possibility within yourself. And the question that hovers, silent and demanding, is this: Will you deny the figure, or will you invite it into the circle of your awareness? For in that choice lies the difference between possession and transformation. Dreams are not illusions. They are not random fragments of the day shuffled by the brain's machinery. As the reductionists would tell you, no, dreams are messages from the unconscious, written in the language of symbols, presented in a grammar older than human speech. They are the theater in which the soul stages what consciousness cannot endure to face. The narcissist, the manipulator, the criminal who harms each of them is visited by dreams that reveal their secret pact with the unconscious. The dream does not simply warn, it shapes destiny. When ignored, it grows teeth. Let me tell you of one such man. He was not violent in appearance, nor visibly unstable. He was educated, articulate, even admired in his profession. Yet, in his confession, he spoke of a dream that had recurred since youth, a labyrinth stretched before him, endless corridors of stone. And at its center coiled a serpent with eyes like burning coals. Each night he wandered the maze. Each night he drew closer to the serpent. And each night he awoke, drenched in sweat. Over time, he came to believe that the dream demanded a sacrifice. The serpent, he thought, would never let him leave until he proved himself worthy. It was not hunger for money or lust for thrill that led him to crime, but the compulsion of the dream. He devised elaborate financial frauds, ensnaring victims in schemes as twisted and endless as the corridors of his nightmare. He likened his deception to guiding them through the maze, and in his private journals, investigators later found sketches of a serpent devouring figures with no faces. Do you see the psychic truth at work? The labyrinth was his unconscious, filled with unacknowledged complexity. The serpent was the archetype of transformation, of power. But in its distorted form, it demanded destruction rather than renewal. Had he sought analysis, had he confronted the dream consciously, he might have learned that the serpent was his own shadow, calling him to wholeness. Instead, he allowed the image to rule him. The dream possessed him until he became its servant, crafting crimes that mirrored its structure. This is what I mean when I say the unconscious does not merely dwell below, it infiltrates, it organizes, it commands. The dream is not passive. It is the rehearsal of destiny. And those who refuse to attend to it, those who dismiss it as mere fantasy, will find themselves walking a path already scripted by symbols they do not understand. The narcissist's dreams are often drenched with imagery of admiration and betrayal. He dreams of being applauded, only to discover the faces in the crowd turned to masks of mockery. He dreams of ascending heights, only to fall endlessly. These are not coincidences. They are the soul's warning that the path of manipulation leads only to collapse. Yet the narcissist rarely listens. He awakens, laughs it off, and doubles his efforts to control the waking world, as if to silence the dream. But the dream returns, more insistent, more cruel. And so I say to you, what dreams stalk your nights? What symbols repeat themselves? Like an old story, demanding recognition? Do not dismiss them. If a labyrinth appears, ask yourself where in your life you are lost. If a serpent coils, ask whether you fear the power within you or whether you are yielding it to darker compulsions. For dreams are mirrors, mirrors in which the criminal sees the image of his crime long before he acts, and in which you may see the seeds of your transformation before they bear fruit. When Freud spoke of dreams, he called them the royal road to the unconscious. But I would go further. They are not only roads, they are crossroads. At every dream stands a choice whether to heed the symbol or to ignore it. To ignore it is to drift toward possession. To heed it is to move toward individuation. In the case of our labyrinthine fraudster, the dream became his master. The serpent demanded victims, and he obeyed. But had he turned inward, had he faced the serpent not as an external god, but as his own repressed hunger for renewal, he might have found another path. He might have shed his skin as the serpent sheds its own, leaving behind the husk of his narcissistic compulsion. Instead, the serpent devoured him. And do you imagine you are exempt? Do you imagine your dreams are harmless, your nightmares insignificant? Each of you carries within a labyrinth. Each of you is stalked by figures of shadow, of animal, of ancient symbol. Ignore them, and you risk the same fate, not always with prison walls, but with prisons of despair, of broken relationships, of self-sabotage. The unconscious is merciless. When ignored, listen to your dreams. Write them down. See their repetitions. For every repetition is a cry. Look here. Attend to this. Do not pretend you are awake while sleep still commands you. The narcissist's manipulation is often dreamlike in itself. He constructs labyrinths. For others, circles of gaslighting, spirals of false promises, corridors of charm that lead to dead ends. In this way, he becomes the architect of other people's nightmares. Yet the pattern is always the same. He externalizes what he refuses to face within. The labyrinth is his, the serpent is his, but he forces you to walk it in his place. Here lies the chilling truth. The victim of the narcissist is not chosen at random. They are chosen to bear the burden of his dream. He cannot face the serpent, so he feeds it with your pain. He cannot wander the maze alone, so he drags you inside. This is why the relationship with the narcissist feels like a dream that twists into nightmare, because it is the projection of his unconscious upon your waking life. Thus, the study of dreams is not a private indulgence, but a safeguard. To know your own dreams is to defend against the imposition of another's. To ignore your dreams is to leave yourself vulnerable to the labyrinths built by those possessed. Tonight, as you leave this hall, I do not ask that you remember my words more than the images they may awaken in you. For it is not argument that liberates, it is vision. When next you dream of the shadowy figure, the serpent, the crumbling tower, or the faceless crowd. Remember, these are not strangers. They are fragments of yourself demanding recognition. To the narcissist, the dream becomes the architect of harm. To you, it may yet become the architect of wholeness, if you dare to face what it reveals. When we descend deeper into the unconscious, we find not only personal shadows and private dreams, but great primordial images that have haunted humanity since the dawn of time. These are the archetypes, universal patterns of psychic energy, ancient dramas that repeat themselves in every culture, in every epoch, in every soul. The narcissist is never merely himself. He is possessed by an archetype. The manipulator, who toys with lives, may think he is clever, original, unique. But in truth, he is acting out a role scripted long before his birth, a mask passed down through countless generations. And in certain individuals, the archetype seizes with such force that it drives them beyond manipulation into violence cloaked in sacred justification. I must tell you of one who illustrates this with chilling clarity. He was not a simple criminal, nor even a man motivated by greed or envy. He was a terrorist who saw himself as a chosen warrior. From youth, he dreamed of fire in the sky, of voices proclaiming that he had been marked for destiny. These were not the random fantasies of an adolescent. They were eruptions of the archetype of the hero, but twisted, distorted, perverted. This man believed he was fighting not for himself, but for a higher cause, for justice, for God. He called himself a soldier of purity, but in truth, he had become the puppet of an archetype gone astray. The hero became the false hero, the redeemer transformed into the avenger, and in his crusade, he detonated bombs, killing innocents, all the while convinced that he was fulfilling a sacred script. You see, archetypes are not good or evil in themselves. They are forces, energies, patterns. The hero, in its true form, is the call to courage, to sacrifice, to protection of the weak. But when claimed by the shadow, it becomes fanaticism. It becomes the self-proclaimed savior who destroys what he claims to rescue. The terrorist's unconscious had fused with this distorted archetype. He could not separate himself from the role. He was intoxicated with meaning, intoxicated with the belief that every act of destruction was sanctified. This is why we must fear not only the shadow, but the archetype, because when an archetype seizes a man, he is no longer a man. He is a vessel of myth, a character in a play that devours reality. And so I say to you, look carefully at your own ideals. Do not imagine you are immune. How many times have you felt the stirring of the hero within you, the desire to prove yourself, to conquer, to be seen as righteous? This desire is not wrong, but if you do not examine it, if you do not ground it in humility, it can betray you. The man who proclaims himself savior may become the very tyrant he wished to overthrow. This is the archetypal danger. The narcissist is often caught in the archetype of the king He desires to rule, to be adored, to sit upon the throne of admiration, but his shadow perverts the king into the tyrant. He does not serve, he enslaves. The manipulator who charms you into submission is not acting as an individual. He is repeating a pattern older than kingdoms, older than temples, older than words. And when you fall into the orbit of such a one, you too are swept into the archetype. You become the victim, the pawn, the sacrificial lamb. This is why the narcissist spell feels so overwhelming, so inescapable. It is not merely personal, it is mythic. You are not just dealing with a man or woman, you are dealing with an ancient drama unfolding once again through flesh. In the seminar of the unconscious, every human life is a stage. Archetypes write the script. You may think you are improvising, but unless you awaken, you are merely repeating lines spoken by countless actors before you. Consider the terrorist again. His bombs were not only explosions in the streets, they were symbols. Each detonation was an attempt to externalize the fire in his dreams. Each victim was an unwilling participant in his myth. To him, they were not human beings. They were offerings to an archetypal god of vengeance. This is why I say the unconscious is dangerous when ignored. It does not disappear. It acts through you, or against you, or upon the world in ways you do not understand. The archetype of the warrior, when integrated, bring a discipline, courage, and protection. But when shadowed, it becomes cruelty, fanaticism, blind destruction. The archetype of the lover, when integrated, brings intimacy and devotion, but when shadowed, it becomes obsession, jealousy, enslavement. The narcissist lives under the spell of these distorted archetypes. His manipulation is not his invention. It is the repetition of ancient patterns. He seduces because the lover archetype demands expression. He dominates because the king archetype demands a throne. He deceives because the trickster archetype whispers in his ear, but none of these energies are conscious within him. They rule him from the depths, and so he becomes their servant rather than their master. And you, how do archetypes live in you? Do you imagine that your dreams of success, of romance, of revenge are purely personal? They are not. They are fragments of myths as old as humanity. When you dream of victory, you are dreaming the hero's dream. When you dream of betrayal, you are dreaming the trickster's plot. When you long for love, you are enacting the lover's song. The danger lies not in dreaming, but in believing the dream to be literal, in mistaking the archetype for your personal destiny. That is when the hero becomes the terrorist, when the king becomes the tyrant, when the lover becomes the stalker. What then is the path? It is not to deny the archetypes, for they are woven into the very fabric of the psyche. It is to recognize them, to engage them consciously, to say, yes, I know you, I will not deny your presence, but neither will I be enslaved. The man who knows the hero lives within him can channel that energy into creativity, into service, into courage. The man who denies it risks being consumed, marching off to war against phantoms of his own unconscious. And so, I warn you, the narcissist who manipulates you is not simply clever, he is mystically possessed. The terrorist who kills is not simply cruel, he is archetypally enthralled. And you, in your daily life, are no less vulnerable. You too are caught in the currents of archetypal tides. To awaken is to become aware that you are both actor and audience, that the play unfolds within you, but you need not repeat it blindly. You may, with effort, with courage, with humility, choose to step aside from the script and become something new. For the archetype does not vanish, it transforms. The serpent that devours may become the serpent that heals. The labyrinth that entraps may become the temple that initiates. The hero that destroys may become the hero that redeems, but only if you dare to see the archetype for what it is. Not your destiny, but your inheritance, to be used wisely or squandered fatally. If the shadow is the darkness we refuse to see, and the archetype is the ancient pattern that seizes us, then the persona is the mask we choose to show the world. It is the polished face, the social costume, the carefully constructed illusion of identity, and while it is necessary without it, no one could navigate society. It becomes deadly when mistaken for the whole self. The narcissist lives within this mask. He has invested all his energy into maintaining the illusion, to be admired, to be respected, to be envied. This is his oxygen, but the persona is fragile, and behind it lurks a chaos. He cannot admit. The more elaborate the mask, the more grotesque the hidden truths. Consider the case of a certain financial fraudster. Outwardly, he was impeccable, tailored suits, eloquent speeches, a philanthropist who donated to art museums and charities. He shook hands with politicians, charmed investors with his vision of prosperity, and projected an image of success so radiant that few dared question it. His persona was flawless, but investigators, when they finally raided his estate, uncovered a secret room, and in that room the walls were covered with his paintings, not landscapes, not portraits, but grotesque images, twisted figures with hollow eyes, bodies stretched into monstrous forms, scenes of chaos and decay. He had never shown them to anyone. They were the mirror of his unconscious bursting through in images too raw for his persona to contain. These paintings were not mere eccentric hobbies. They were the eruption of a truth, his mask concealed. The fraud he enacted upon the world was already foretold in these canvases. Distorted, deceptive, a theater of shadows painted over with color. He had lived so long behind the persona of the brilliant businessman that his true psyche bled out only in secret brushstrokes. And when his empire collapsed, the world gasps, not only at the financial ruin, but at the revelation of the grotesque self he had hidden. This is the peril of the persona. It is meant to serve as an interface between the individual and society, not as a prison. When we cling to it too tightly, we forget who we are beneath it, and the shadow, Jungian, swells in the darkness until it bursts forth in destructive ways. The narcissist's mask is seductive because it appeals to what we wish were true. He presents himself as the ideal partner, the visionary leader, the flawless friend. We fall in love with a persona because it mirrors our own unacknowledged desires. But like all masks, it cracks, and when it does, what emerges is often monstrous. Ask yourself, what mask do you wear? Do you play the role of the dutiful son, the loyal employee, the cheerful companion, while hiding resentments, doubts, and hungers you cannot admit? That hidden part does not vanish. It waits. It will speak through your dreams, through your sudden outbursts, through your inexplicable compulsions. The mask protects, but it also suffocates. The fraudster story is not unique. I have seen it in many forms. The politician who projects righteousness while harboring corruption. The preacher who smiles from the pulpit while privately consumed by vice. The parent who performs devotion while resenting the children in silence. The persona says, "This is who I am," but the paintings in the hidden room always tell another story. And you, have you entered your hidden room? Have you dared to look at the grotesque paintings your soul has created? Perhaps they are not literal images on canvas, but patterns in your behavior, the ways you sabotage yourself, the secrets you bury, the rage that erupts without warning. These are your paintings. They reveal what the mask cannot contain. The persona is not evil, but it is dangerous when worshipped, for it is not you, it is only a mask. The true task is to wear it lightly, to know when to set it aside, to remember that behind it is a self vast, chaotic, and whole. The narcissist cannot do this. He clings to the persona as if it were life itself. To admit its falsity would be to collapse, and so he deceives others, and eventually himself, until reality tears away the mask by force. The financial fraudster, when exposed, collapsed into despair, not because of the money lost, but because the persona he had crafted so carefully was shattered. He could no longer live in the mask, and without it, he did not know who he was. The grotesque paintings on his walls were not merely art, they were a prophecy of his fall. Thus, I say to you, do not mistake the mask for the self. If you do, you will live like a ghost, and when the mask falls as it must, you will face not only the judgment of others, but the terror of meeting yourself for the first time. Better to look now, better to acknowledge the grotesque within while the mask still stands, for only then can the persona become a servant, not a master. Only then can you step beyond manipulation, beyond fraud, beyond the prison of illusion, into authenticity,